Angry neighbor tries to shut down BBQ, but didn't know the father is now the chief of police. It started like any normal Saturday afternoon. Laughter echoed in the backyard. The smell of grilled food floated through the air. Plates clinked, kids ran through sprinklers, and upbeat music played softly from a speaker on the porch. The Johnson family had just moved into their new home, a quiet, clean neighborhood where the streets had names like Birchwood Lane and Pinecrest Drive. It was the kind of place where people trimmed their lawns twice a week, waved politely while jogging, and left seasonal wreaths on their doors. So when the Johnsons decided to host a simple neighborhood barbecue, it felt like the right thing to do. They wanted to say hello, shake hands, share a meal, be part of something. But not everyone wanted them there, and someone, hidden behind a curtain or sitting by a window, picked up their phone and called the police. That's when everything changed. No one expected what happened next. No one expected the man flipping burgers by the grill to turn around and calmly step forward, badge tucked beneath his shirt, quiet power in his voice, and say, "Good evening, officers. I'm Chief V. Johnson, is there a problem?" The story began just a few weeks earlier, when the Johnson family pulled up to their new house in a black SUV packed with boxes and excitement. The kids, Jasmine and Kevin, jumped out first, racing toward the porch. Angela stepped out next, her eyes wide as she looked up at the white-trimmed windows and flower beds. She smiled and turned to her husband. "It's perfect," she whispered. Michael nodded, placing a steady hand on her back. "Yeah, it really is." Michael Johnson wasn't a flashy man. He didn't speak loudly or try to impress anyone, but his presence filled a space. Years of service in law enforcement had shaped him into someone who could calm chaos just by walking into a room. And now, after years of hard work, he had been named the town's new chief of police. Angela was a school teacher, smart, kind, always thinking ahead. She saw the good in people, even when they didn't see it in themselves. Their children, full of life and curiosity, were already dreaming up adventures in their new backyard. This was supposed to be a new chapter, but across the street, someone was already watching. Mrs. Thompson had lived on that block for over 40 years. Her house was spotless, her roses always trimmed. She believed in the way things used to be, and change didn't sit well with her. From behind her curtains, she watched the Johnsons unpack. Her lips tightened. "More of them," she muttered, to herself. The first few days passed quietly. Michael mowed the lawn. Angela planted flowers. Jasmine made chalk drawings on the sidewalk while Kevin tried to build a treehouse from scrap wood. Some neighbors waved politely. A few introduced themselves, but many didn't. There was a distance, a tension in the air, the kind people don't speak about out loud, but feel in the pauses, in the silence after a greeting, in the way some conversations stopped when the Johnsons walked by. Still, Angela stayed hopeful. "Let's host something," she told Michael, one night as they sat on the porch. "Something small, a barbecue. Let's invite the neighbors and get to know them." Michael hesitated. "Do you think they'll come?" "If we show them who we are," she said, "maybe they will." And so they planned it. Jasmine made colorful invitations with markers and glitter. Kevin helped set up folding chairs in the yard. Angela prepared the menu: grilled ribs, potato salad, lemonade in glass pitchers. Michael cleaned the grill and even bought extra lawn games for the kids. They went door to door, smiles on their faces, handing out invitations. Some neighbors smiled back. Others took the flyer and gave vague responses. And when Angela and Jasmine stopped at Mrs. Thompson's door, she barely opened it. "I'll think about it," she said, then closed it without saying goodbye. Still, the Johnsons kept going, because kindness was who they were. Saturday came. The sun was high. Music was playing. Guests began to arrive, some shy, others chatty. Kids ran around. Angela laughed with a woman from 2 streets over. Michael flipped burgers and handed plates to neighbors he'd never met before. For the first time since they moved in, these Johnsons felt like this place could really become home. Then, in the distance, flashing lights. A police cruiser slowed to a stop near the curb. The music stopped. Conversations went quiet. Every head turned. Angela's hand gripped her glass. Jasmine looked around, confused. Michael set down the spatula and walked toward the officers without panic, without fear, only calm strength. One officer stepped forward. "Received a call about a noise complaint." Michael nodded slowly. "That's so?" He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his ID. "Well, you've come to the right place. I'm Chief Johnson. This is my house." For a moment, no one spoke. Then, the officer's face changed. "Oh, sir, we didn't realize—" Michael gave a small smile. "It's okay. Why don't you come in, grab a plate, and see what kind of disturbance we've got going on?" Behind him, neighbors watched in stunned silence. And across the street, behind a curtain, Mrs. Thompson stood frozen. The barbecue had just become something much bigger than she ever expected, and the neighborhood was about to change forever. After the police left the barbecue that day, people started talking. Quietly at first, then a little louder as the evening went on. Some guests looked confused. Others looked uncomfortable. A few left early, offering short goodbyes. Angela cleaned up the food with a tight smile, her hands moving slower than usual. Michael said nothing at first. He just kept watching the street, as if waiting for another patrol car to come back. But Jasmine, their daughter, finally asked what everyone was thinking. Why would someone call the police on us? Angela looked at Michael. He looked at the sky for a moment, then down at the ground. Then he crouched beside his daughter and said quietly, "Because some people don't want us here, sweetheart." "Not really." Angela said nothing. She just reached over and took Jasmine's hand. The night ended quietly. But the real story, the one behind the police visit, had started days before. It began with a woman named Mrs. Thompson. She lived directly across the street. Always wore pearl earrings and buttoned blouses. Always had her hair brushed back and her curtains halfway open. If you asked her, she'd tell you she knew everything about Maplewood. And maybe she did. She had lived there for 42 years. She knew every house, every tree, every neighbor. But she didn't know the Johnsons, and she didn't want to. The first time she saw their car pull into the driveway, her hands froze over her knitting. The second time, when she saw Angela watering the plants and Kevin chasing Jasmine with a toy rocket, her lips pressed together in a hard line. She never said anything out loud. Not yet. But inside, she was already judging. Too loud. Too different. Too proud of themselves. The kind of thoughts she never wrote down. Never shared with anyone directly. But they lived in the way she looked at people, and how quickly she looked away. The first time Angela tried to introduce herself, Mrs. Thompson gave a thin smile. "Oh," she said, "you're the new family." Angela nodded, holding out a tray of muffins. "We just moved in last week. Thought we'd say hello." Mrs. Thompson didn't take the tray. "Well," she said, "things are changing, I suppose." Angela smiled anyway. "We're looking forward to being part of the community." Mrs. Thompson looked her up and down. "We'll see," she said, then turned to her roses. Angela stood there for a moment, the tray of muffins still in her hands. Then she turned around and walked back across the street. Later that evening, she told Michael, "She was polite. Sort of. But I don't think she wants to know us." Michael just nodded. "Let her be. She'll come around, or she won't." But Angela had a feeling, a cold one, and she couldn't shake it. Over the next few days, things started happening. Nothing big, nothing you could point to and say, That's wrong. But it was in the air. The couple next door smiled at Angela in the morning, but didn't wave at Michael later that day. Someone pulled their child away from Kevin at the park. Not rudely, just quickly. Another neighbor returned a conversation. Mid-sentence when Angela walked by. It wasn't hate. It wasn't shouting or threats. It was the quiet kind of rejection. The one that hides under fake smiles and half-hearted nods. And Mrs. Thompson was always there, walking her dog in slow circles around the block, pausing just long enough in front of the Johnsons' house to see who was visiting, peeking from behind her window when deliveries came, pretending to pick weeds while eavesdropping on laughter in the yard. She told herself it wasn't personal, that she was just being cautious, that her neighborhood had always had standards. Certain kinds of people didn't understand how things worked, but the truth was simpler. Mrs. Thompson was afraid of change, of losing control, of things she never had to think about before. And the Johnsons? They were a mirror she didn't want to look into. Then the barbecue invitation came. Angela and Jasmine knocked on her door, holding a brightly colored flyer. Jasmine smiled so wide it made her cheeks hurt. "We're having a barbecue this Saturday," she said, holding it out. "Everyone's coming." Mrs. Thompson took the paper but didn't smile. I'll see," she said, then added, "Children should be seen, not heard." Jasmine's smile faded a little. Angela kept her tone even. "We'd love to have you." Mrs. Thompson said nothing more. She closed the door slowly. The invitation drooped in her hand like a piece of junk mail. Later that night, she sat at her window, watching the Johnsons hang string lights and stack folding chairs. She saw Angela laughing with Michael. She saw the kids playing tag in the backyard, and something in her twisted. They think they belong. "Here," she said to herself. "Just because he's the police chief?" Her dog barked. She snapped her fingers to quiet him. She stayed there for over an hour, watching, thinking. She didn't want their food, or their smiles, or their music. She wanted her neighborhood back, the one she remembered, even if it had never really existed the way she thought. So she made a plan. She picked up her phone, and she waited for Saturday. The morning of the barbecue started quiet. A soft breeze moved through the trees. The sun peeked through thin clouds. Birds chirped above the rooftops of Maplewood, and all along Birchwood Lane, people pulled curtains aside to peek outside. The Johnsons were already busy. Michael checked the grill in the backyard. He had marinated the ribs overnight. His hands moved with practiced ease, flipping, brushing, seasoning, smiling a little to himself. He liked order, structure, a good plan. And today, everything was going according to plan. Angela stood on the porch, arranging trays of fresh fruit, homemade lemonade, and cornbread muffins she had baked before sunrise. She moved quickly but calmly. She wanted everything to feel warm, easy, welcoming. She hoped that if people just came, if they saw her family laughing, sharing food, being human, maybe things would soften. Jasmine ran back and forth hanging decorations she'd made herself. Paper streamers and hand-painted, signs that said welcome, and "So glad you're here." Kevin helped her carry folding chairs, his little hands gripping the metal frames while his face shined with joy. To them, it was simple. Today was a party. Today meant fun. But across the street, Mrs. Thompson stood at her window in silence. The same silence she'd held all week. She hadn't answered follow-up greetings. She hadn't waved back when Angela smiled. And now, she held the barbecue invitation in her hand, creased and wrinkled, folded and unfolded so many times it barely looked like paper anymore. She told herself she wasn't going. She had told other neighbors too, ones she trusted. That's how it started. Small comments, dropped into everyday conversations. "Oh, they're throwing a barbecue? Well, I suppose anyone can do that these days." Or, "I just hope they're not too loud." You know how these things can get." Some nodded, some said nothing, but the seeds were planted. Mrs. Thompson didn't ask anyone to boycott. She didn't have to. Her words had weight, especially among the older neighbors, the ones who had lived on that street as long as she had. People who remembered the old Maplewood, even if what they remembered had never truly been fair to everyone. By noon, a few families had sent polite texts to Angela. "Sorry, we won't be able to make it. Last-minute plans." "Oh no, I just remembered I had an appointment. Next time for sure." Angela smiled at her phone, nodded, said, "That's okay," out loud, even though no one was there to hear her. Michael noticed. He came over and kissed her cheek. "It doesn't matter who shows up," he said. "It's for whoever wants to come." "I know," she said softly. "But I'd be lying if I said it didn't sting." By 2 p.m., the grill was smoking, music was playing, and a few neighbors did show up. A young couple from the next block, a single mother with 2 kids, a retired teacher named Mrs. Wilson who always brought a pie to everything. They smiled. They hugged. They filled plates and laughed and stayed longer than they planned. Angela talked with the retired teacher about school. Michael helped a kid fix a broken toy. Jasmine showed her art projects to anyone who'd listen. Kevin handed out lemonade like he owned a business, and for a while everything felt right. But Mrs. Thompson kept watching. Her dog lay curled by her feet as she sat stiff in her living room chair, staring out through lace curtains like a queen watching invaders enter her gates. To her, it didn't matter that people were smiling, or that the Johnsons were kind, or that nothing bad was happening. What mattered was that they were changing things, and in her mind, change meant danger. That's when she made her decision. She picked up the phone. Her voice was calm, almost sweet. She told the dispatcher there was a large gathering that seemed unusual. She mentioned strangers, in and out. She said she was concerned about possible noise, or worse. She added just enough doubt, just enough fear. Just enough words to make it sound like she wasn't being cruel, only cautious. The dispatcher said thank you and hung up. Mrs. Thompson felt satisfied. She didn't expect violence. She just wanted to make a point. She wanted them to be reminded. They didn't run this place. That no matter how many muffins they baked or how many decorations they hung, they were still different. Back at the barbecue, the Johnsons had no idea what was coming. More guests had arrived. A few younger couples. Some kids from down the street. People who were curious, open, or just hungry. Laughter filled the air. Games began in the yard. Michael told a funny story about burning toast during police academy training. Angela helped someone fix a loose chair leg. The kids were running with balloons. Then someone said, "Hey, is that a police car?" Angela froze. Michael turned slowly. Cruiser was pulling up, lights spinning, not fast, not loud, but present, visible. The music stopped. The laughter faded. Everyone stared, and in that moment, on a beautiful sunny day, surrounded by family, neighbors, and food, Michael's face changed. Not fear, not anger, just something tired, something heavy. He handed the spatula to Kevin, smoothed his shirt, and walked calmly toward the driveway. Angela followed behind, her heart pounding. Jasmine grabbed Kevin's hand. And across the street, Mrs. Thompson smiled, then leaned forward in her chair. She had no idea what was about to happen next. The tires of the police cruiser crunched gently against the curb. 2 officers stepped out, one younger, one older. Neither of them looked rushed. No shouting, no sirens. Just the quiet tension that hung in the air whenever uniforms entered a space where they weren't expected. Michael saw it all in one glance. The way the laughter stopped, the way 2 guests quickly put down their drinks, how Jasmine stepped in front of her little brother without even realizing it. Angela was by his side now, her hand brushing his. Not grabbing, just touching, just to feel something steady. He took a breath and stepped forward. The officers glanced around the yard. A few folding chairs, a plastic table with lemonade, children with balloons, smoke curling from a grill. Not exactly the chaos they'd been warned about. Michael walked toward them with calm steps. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't puff his chest. He simply carried the authority that lived in his bones. "Evening, officers," he said quietly. "Can I help you?" The younger one hesitated. The older officer pulled out a small notepad. "We got a call," he said. "Noise complaint. Possible. Disturbance." Michael nodded slowly. "I see. And this is the address that came through?" The older officer looked around again. "Yes, sir." Angela spoke now, her voice polite but steady. "We're just having a small barbecue. Invited some neighbors. It's all very normal." Michael reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet, opened it carefully, showed his badge. The older officer blinked. "Oh," he said. "You're Chief Johnson?" Michael gave a half smile. "Yes, sir. This is my home." For a full 2 seconds, no one said anything. The kind of pause that weighs more than words. The younger officer cleared his throat. "We, didn't know it was you, Chief. Dispatch didn't say." "It's fine," Michael said. "You're doing your job." He didn't sound angry. Just tired. The officers glanced around again, clearly unsure what to do now. Michael stepped back and gestured to the yard. "You're welcome to take a look. Make sure everything's as boring as it seems." The older one shook his head. "No need, Chief. We can already see it's nothing serious. Just a misunderstanding." Angela looked at him closely. "Was it a neighbor?" The officer hesitated, then nodded slightly. "Someone said there was a lot of unfamiliar activity. Seemed concerned. We're not at liberty to say more." Angela's jaw tightened, but she nodded. "Of course." Michael extended his hand. "Thanks for coming out. I appreciate the professionalism." The officers shook his hand, a little awkwardly now. "Have a good evening, Chief, ma'am." And just like that, they were gone. But not really, because their presence stayed in the air long after the cruiser pulled away. Across the street, behind a curtain, Mrs. Thompson was frozen. She had expected more, expected questions, maybe an order to shut things down. Expected something that would remind him, that he didn't truly belong. Instead, he had stood tall, had shown his badge, had made her look like a fool without even pointing at her. She dropped the curtain. Her hands shook slightly as she walked to her kitchen, poured herself a cup of tea she didn't want. Her thoughts raced. What if someone saw me watching? What if someone figures out I made the call? She had always known how to keep things quiet, keep things proper. But now the balance had shifted, and she didn't like the way it felt. Back in the Johnsons' yard, the party tried to restart. Angela turned the music back on, just a little softer now. Michael went back to the grill, though he wasn't as talkative. Jasmine and Kevin ran to their friends, but not as fast as before. Neighbors started whispering. Some glanced across the street. Others looked at their phones. A few stayed. Some quietly slipped out. Mrs. Wilson came up to Angela with a gentle voice. "That was completely uncalled for," she said. "You did nothing wrong." Angela gave a thin smile. "Thank you. I'm just sorry the kids had to see it." Michael joined her. "They'll be okay. But they'll remember this." Angela nodded. "And so will we." One of the younger guests stepped forward, a man in his 30s who had kept mostly quiet. He said softly, This is exactly why what you're doing matters." "Why this barbecue matters?" Michael raised an eyebrow. The man continued, "Because if people like her," he nodded toward the street, "get to decide who belongs, then we've already lost." Angela looked at him, then around at the others who were still there. And in that moment, she realized something. They weren't alone. They never had been. Inside the house later that night, Kevin asked the question they had been waiting for. "Dad, why did the police come?" "We didn't do anything wrong." Michael sat beside him on the edge of the bed. "You're right," he said. "We didn't. But sometimes people feel afraid of what they don't understand. And when people are afraid, they make bad choices." "Like calling the police on a barbecue?" Michael nodded. "Exactly like that." Kevin was quiet. Then he said, "But they left. Because you're the boss." Michael chuckled softly. "I'm the chief, yes. But that's not why they left. They left because the truth is stronger than fear. And what we were doing wasn't wrong." Kevin nodded slowly. "Next time, can I still help with the lemonade?" Michael smiled. "You better." Angela stood at the window that night, looking out at the backyard. Empty cups on tables, streamers blowing gently in the wind. The smell of barbecue still clinging to the air, Michael came and stood beside her. "We handled it right," he said quietly. Angela nodded. "But it's not over." "No," Michael agreed. "It's just begun." From across the street, a light flicked off in Mrs. Thompson's window, and in the darkness that followed, two families sat on opposite sides of the street, each holding their own kind of silence. But only one of them was building something stronger than fences. By Monday morning, word had spread, not in headlines or group chats, just through quiet. Voices at mailboxes, slow conversations between hedges, or neighbors lingering longer on their front steps than usual. Everyone on Birchwood Lane seemed to have their own version of what happened at the barbecue. Some said it was just a misunderstanding. Others whispered about a call that shouldn't have been made. And a few, mostly the older ones who always kept their lawns too perfect, said nothing at all. But one thing became clear. The Johnsons weren't just new neighbors anymore. They were the center of attention. The silence around them was gone, replaced by something more awkward, but somehow more honest. Angela felt it when she dropped Jasmine and Kevin off at school. A woman who hadn't even waved at her before now stopped her near the playground and said, "I heard about what happened Saturday. I'm sorry. You handled it with grace." Angela thanked her politely, but inside she was unsure how to feel. Michael felt it too. When he arrived at the police station, one of his junior officers looked at him differently. Not with disrespect, more like regret. "Chief," the young man said, avoiding his eyes. "If I had known it was your address." Michael cut him off gently. "I wouldn't want you to treat me differently. What matters is how you treat people when you don't know who they are." The officer nodded, embarrassed. Michael walked to his office and closed the door behind him. For a long moment he stood there, staring at his own badge on the desk. Not because he doubted it, but because it reminded him of how far he'd come, and how far they still had to go. At home, Angela sat on the porch with a cup of tea that had gone cold. Mrs. Wilson came walking by, her small shopping bag bouncing against her side. "Mind if I sit?" she asked. Angela smiled, moved a cushion. "Please." They sat in quiet for a while, just birds in the trees and the occasional sound of a distant lawnmower. Mrs. Wilson finally said, "When my husband and I moved into this neighborhood in the 1970s, we were the first black couple on this street." Angela looked over, surprised. "He was a teacher. I was a nurse." "We thought we had made it," Mrs. Wilson said, chuckling bitterly. "Then someone threw eggs at our front door the second night we were here." Angela's face dropped. "I'm so sorry," Mrs. Wilson waved her hand gently. "We stayed, and I'm glad we did. But it taught me that sometimes you have to plant your roots deeper when the wind blows hardest." Angela blinked back emotion. "That woman across the street," Mrs. Wilson added. has been holding on to a world that doesn't exist anymore. Maybe it never really did. And now she's watching it change, and she doesn't know what to do except lash out, Angela whispered. She tried to humiliate us. She tried, Mrs. Wilson said. But you didn't let her. That's what they'll remember. Angela smiled faintly. We were just trying to feed people. Exactly, Mrs. Wilson said, standing. Keep feeding them. Kindness is heavier than hate. That evening, Michael and Angela sat with Jasmine and Kevin on the back patio. The kids were quieter than usual. Kevin finally asked, "Are we going to move again?" Angela turned toward him sharply. "Why would you say that?" "I don't know," he said. "It just feels like maybe we're not wanted." Michael leaned forward. "Look at me, son. We're not going anywhere." Jasmine tilted her head. "Even if people keep being mean?" Michael paused, then nodded. "Especially then." Angela looked between her children. "This is our street now, just like it's everyone else's, and we're not going to let someone's fear decide how we live." Kevin thought about that. Jasmine smiled, just a little. Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out his badge again, like he had at the barbecue. "See this?" he said. "This doesn't just mean I'm the police chief. It means I protect people, not just from crime, but from feeling like they don't belong." Jasmine asked, "Even from people like Mrs. Thompson?" Michael nodded. "Even her." Later that night, Mrs. Thompson stood at her kitchen sink, rinsing out a teacup. Her curtains were open now, but only a little. Enough to see the Johnsons, porch light glowing and shadows of the family sitting together, laughing softly, as if nothing had ever gone wrong. It made her feel something she didn't like. Not anger, not pride, something closer to being afraid. Not of them, but of what that porch light meant. It meant they weren't leaving, they weren't hiding, they weren't trying to blend in anymore. They were just living. And there was nothing she could do about it. She turned away from the window and sat at her kitchen table. The silence in her house felt heavier than it used to. She looked around at all the things she had once been proud of. Her perfect chairs, her spotless rugs, her porcelain tea set, and for the first time in a long time, she wondered what all of it was for. Back across the street, Angela turned off the porch light. Michael locked the front door, and Jasmine whispered to her, "Brother, if someone calls the police again, Dad's gonna handle it like a boss." Kevin smiled. "Yeah, like a barbecue boss." Michael heard them, smiled, but said nothing because he knew something they didn't yet. This wasn't just about a barbecue. This was about building something real in a place that didn't expect them to stay, and they were just getting started. Monday after the barbecue, Michael sat at the dining table early in the morning. The house was quiet. Sunlight touched the corner of his coffee mug, and outside, birds chirped like nothing had ever happened. But everything had changed. Angela joined him, hair tied up, eyes still heavy with sleep. She poured tea and sat across from him without a bow. Word. There was nothing to say, really. The silence between them was full, not empty. Like they both already knew what the other was thinking. Angela finally broke it. "We can't let that be the last word." Michael nodded. "I know." She stared into her mug. "I want to do something. Not loud, not angry, but something lasting." Michael looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Let's bring them all together." Angela frowned. "Like a second barbecue?" "No," he said. "Something bigger. Something that tells people we're not going anywhere, but we're not here to fight either. We're here to build." Angela sat back slowly. "A meeting?" Michael nodded once. "At the rec center, open to everyone." She thought for a moment. "You'd be the one speaking." "I'd speak as a neighbor," he said. "Not just as police chief. As a husband, a father, A black man living across the street from a woman who looked me in the eye and saw trouble, instead of trust. Angela didn't flinch. She reached across the table and took his hand. Then we do it together. Word of the meeting spread quickly. Some people were surprised. Others were curious. A few, like Mrs. Thompson, pretended not to hear about it at all. Flyers went up on street corners. Angela printed them at the school where she taught. Jasmine helped design a few posters, bright and simple. Kevin handed them to neighbors walking, their dogs. They didn't knock on Mrs. Thompson's door again. They didn't need to. Angela had already handed her an invitation. It had just looked like a plate of barbecue. On the evening of the meeting, folding chairs lined the rec center's old wooden floor. Angela set up a table in the back with juice, cookies, and leftover cornbread. Michael stood by the podium in his plainest shirt, no uniform, no badge, just himself. People trickled in. Mrs. Wilson arrived early, her cane tapping gently with every step. A couple with a stroller followed. Then more. People from Maplewood who had seen what happened or heard whispers. Eventually, the room was full. And still, there was a quiet space in the back. One chair, second row from the wall. Empty. Until Mrs. Thompson arrived. She came alone. No makeup, no pearls, just a stiff cardigan and the same guarded look. She didn't greet anyone. She didn't smile, but she sat down and listened. Michael stepped up to the front. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "Thank you for coming. I won't take much of your time. I just want to tell you why I moved here with my family, why I stood in my own backyard last weekend and introduced myself to two officers who didn't expect me to live there." He paused. "We moved to Maplewood because we wanted what every family wants. Peace. A yard to play in. Neighbors to laugh with. A chance to give our kids something better." He glanced around the room. Faces looked back. Some warm, some nervous. "We didn't come to change your town. We came to join it. But we've been met with looks, whispers, and, in one case, a call to the police for having music and ribs on a Saturday afternoon." A few people looked down. Mrs. Thompson's hands were locked tight in her lap. Michael's voice never rose. "I'm not angry. I've worn this badge long enough to know what fear can do. But fear doesn't get to decide who belongs. Respect does. And we've shown ours. Now we're asking for yours." Angela stood beside him now. She didn't say anything, just offered quiet support. "I want Maplewood to be better," Michael said. "Not perfect, just better. And that starts with seeing each other as people, not problems." When he finished, the room stayed silent. Then Mrs. Wilson slowly stood. "This community has been through a lot, and I'm tired of pretending. It hasn't. This man, this family, is a blessing to us if we're willing to see it." Another neighbor stood. Then another. A few clapped, some just nodded. Michael stepped back. The work wasn't done, but it had begun. Mrs. Thompson stayed seated. She didn't speak, but after most people had left, she approached the refreshment table. Angela was packing up the leftover cookies. Mrs. Thompson stood for a moment, eyes fixed on her hands, then said quietly, "I didn't expect all of that." Angela turned to her slowly. "Most people didn't." Mrs. Thompson swallowed hard. "I made a mistake." Angela looked at her for a long time. "Yes, you did." There was no anger in her voice. Just truth. Mrs. Thompson looked away. "If there's anything I can do to help fix things." Angela didn't answer right away. Then she said, "Come to the garden meeting. Saturday morning, behind the school. We're starting a community project." Mrs. Thompson blinked. "A garden?" Angela nodded. "It's a place for things to grow." She held out a flyer. Mrs. Thompson took it. This time, with both hands. It started with a patch of empty grass behind the school, just dirt. Uneven, dry, forgotten. But Angela saw potential. So did Michael. And so did a few others, neighbors who had shown up at the community meeting, still thinking about the words spoken, still sitting with the silence that had followed. That week, Angela put together a sign-up sheet. Maplewood Community Garden, a place to grow together. She didn't expect much at first, maybe a few families, a couple of volunteers. But something strange happened. People started adding their names, the couple with the stroller, the single mom who had stayed after the barbecue, even the young man who had brought folding chairs in his trunk. By the third day, there were over 20 names. On Saturday morning, they gathered. Michael brought gloves. Angela brought snacks. Kevin carried a bag of seeds that kept spilling in his hands. Jasmine drew labels on cardboard signs for carrots, tomatoes, herbs. And then, just as they were raking out the soil, Mrs. Thompson showed up. She wore a wide sun hat and carried a small shovel. She didn't say anything. She just walked over, picked a corner, and started working the dirt. Angela glanced at her. Mrs. Thompson didn't look up, but she said softly, "My grandmother grew lavender. I thought I'd try some here." Angela nodded. Lavender sounds nice. They didn't need to say more, because in that moment, something had changed. It wasn't perfect. Not yet, but it was honest. And that was enough. Over the next few weeks, the garden took shape. Neighbors who had never spoken before found themselves pulling weeds side by side. A teenager from the next street came every afternoon after school to water the beans. Mrs. Wilson brought tomato starts in small pots and showed the kids how to plant them without bruising the roots. Even Mrs. Thompson came back, more than once. At first, she stayed quiet, but slowly she began to soften. She offered tips, told old stories. Once, she even laughed when Kevin spilled an entire bag of compost and blamed it on gravity. Michael stood back some days and watched it all with quiet pride. He saw fences in people's hearts coming down, inch by inch, root by root. By summer's end, the garden was full. Bright green lettuce, thick tomato vines, yellow sunflowers leaning toward the sky. And right in the corner, under a small wooden sign Jasmine had painted, stood a blooming patch of lavender. They held a harvest gathering in the garden. Tables covered in vegetables, homemade pies, grilled corn. Neighbors brought chairs and blankets. Kids painted rocks. Someone played guitar. Michael and Angela didn't make speeches. They didn't have to. The garden spoke for itself, and for the first time since they moved in, they felt the weight lift. Not all the way, but enough. Enough to breathe easier. Enough to stay. Later that night, after the gathering had ended and the stars blinked quietly above the houses, Michael stood in the backyard. The lights were off inside. Angela had taken Kevin to bed. Jasmine was reading in her room, feet tucked under her blanket. The wind carried the scent of basil from the garden. Across the street, a porch light flicked on. Mrs. Thompson stepped out. She stood there for a moment, then raised her hand. Just a small wave. Michael raised his hand in return. They didn't say anything, but in that small gesture was something unexpected. Acknowledgement, maybe even respect. Angela stepped outside behind him, slipping her arm around his waist. "Did she wave?" she asked softly. Michael smiled. "She did." Angela leaned against him. "Funny how a garden can do what a meeting can't," Michael nodded. "You can't argue with something that grows." They stood together in the cool night breeze, looking out at the quiet street. It didn't feel like enemy territory anymore. It felt like home. Still imperfect, still healing, but home. Angela whispered, "I think we made it." Michael didn't answer right away. He looked out at the community they had fought to join, at the garden they built from nothing. at the family they had protected, not just with a badge, but with love. Then he said, "No, we're still making it." Angela smiled, and they went inside, tired, proud, and ready for whatever came next. The Johnsons didn't win with noise. They didn't win by yelling or shaming or walking away. They won by staying, by planting roots, by choosing patience over pride. And over time, they changed a neighborhood, not by force, but by example. A barbecue started it, a garden finished it, and what grew in between was community, real, lasting, and strong, just like them.